Hello, photo prompters, flash writers, snapshot takers, and road trippers. I'm Brooke Warner, and yet one more thing that my co-host Grant Faulkner and I share is a love of road trips, and that is one reason that I was very happy when Grant wrote his most recent book, Something Out There in the Distance. And so I want to start with the log line I've seen floating around for this book. It goes like this: two lovers go on one final road trip through the American desert, hoping that they can outrun life itself. I love that so much, Grant. And it's one aspect of a road trip that we're trying to outrun life, figuratively or literally. So say more.
Yeah, I always feel like I'm a bit on the run when I take road trips. It's kind of a peculiar joy. I find myself that I'm in between spaces and in between lives in a way, and the rules just of life just don't seem to apply in the same way, that they did previously. And I got to say, I'm always amazed when people tell me they don't like road trips because they are my definition of happiness. And I know that you've driven cross country maybe 2 or 3 times since I've known you. And I remember you even rented an RV or some major big ass vehicle at least once. Am I right?
Yes. Oh my gosh, that was during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it was during the pandemic. So I'm curious. I find that all my friends generally like road trips. So that's one criteria of friendship for me. But I'm curious why you like road trips.
Well, I'm glad we're doing this. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to say that this is like in celebration and honoring finally of your book, Somewhere Out There in the Distance, which came out a little while ago, but we're doing it through this framework of like, why road trips? I mean, tell me someone who doesn't like road trips. You're right. It is a criteria because they're so great. I mean, the wide open space. I love the time alone if you happen to be alone. I mean, that RV trip that I did in 2020 during the pandemic, California to New York and back. I did that with my then 8-year-old son and my dog. That was not actually relaxing at all, but it was very memorable. So it was worth it. Last year, I drove from Detroit to California by myself. I was bringing a car from Detroit to home. I found it meditative and restorative. For me, this is like the last couple road trips I've done where I've gone into the country. Like it does restore your faith in the United States. People are so great, and you realize like, we are, in fact, more similar than our politicians who are hell bent on dividing us would have us believe. This is such a beautiful country. I think getting on the road for a few days or longer is a great reset. So, all of those reasons. How about you, Grant? Like, tell us about your love affair with road trips and how that led to this incredible book, Something Out There in the Distance.
Yeah, I think all the things you just said. You get in touch with the wild, rich diversity of this nation, both in landscape and people. And it's just like you said, that there isn't much dividing us really in the end. You meet a lot of great people on the road, and the landscape is generally just captivating, even when it's boring. Like I actually like driving across Nebraska, which might be the longest land mass in the world. It takes a long time to get across it. But yeah, I think in the end it is that meditative quality. Like I just love listening to music, driving, being alone with my thoughts. I have to say that I especially love road trips when I'm alone. That's a kind of strange thing. But yeah, and I think that played into my joy in writing this book, which I always say, or have been saying, it's my favorite book that I've ever written. And that's because it really was without any angst or burden. And in part, that's because it was a road trip, but in part, that's because I wrote it with photos that my friend Gail Butensky took of the Southwest. And we were collaborators on this. And the writing part was all just kind of random and effortless. And she gave me about 30 or 40 photos, and I would just pick one out. And if it inspired a short story, then I wrote it. And then I'd pick another photo to see if I could build on the story, and so on. So the overall story just kind of emerged very organically and intuitively, one photo and one story at a time. And the story in short is that the main character, Dawn, is dying. She's a photographer, and she takes photos of desert landscapes and odd roadside curiosities as a kind of flight from a terminal illness. And then her boyfriend Johnny drives just to drive, and he's looking for a home even as he's kind of caught up in his restlessness. And they're both in that space between presence and absence. And the photographs, Gail's actual photographs, hold that same quality. They're beautiful and they're haunted at the same time, and they're full of action and raw energy, and they're just very textured and alive. And I've always admired her photos.
I'm glad we're doing this show kind of differently because you're going to talk to Gail after you and I talk. And so it's kind of going to be a fun side by side experience, kind of like your book, actually.
Yeah.
um, and I'm curious because you do call this a flash novel, which is not something most people have encountered before. So, what is that?
Yeah, I've been calling it a flash novel because I don't have a better term. It's in one way it's a collection of very short stories, flash fictions, but they're all linked. And so I like to think that they accumulate into something larger. There's an arc, characters who deepen, a relationship that develops and suffers and endures. And so it's a novel in the emotional sense, but it reads the way the photographs do, in flashes and in fragments and in moments that hold more than they show. And it's interesting that we're seeing the emergence of the flash memoir genre these days. And I don't know of many memoirs that are structured as deeply around photos as this book, but I think it would be a great way to tell a story, through a series of snapshots from your life.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The closest thing that I ever worked on similar to this is a book at Seal called Charlotte's Seventh Mistake. And it's a book that's basically like a scrapbook with images, but it was a memoir. And so it's interesting. And these books are often very beautiful, especially because so much attention is spent to the images, which is true of your book, of course. But just for the sake of reminding readers, we had a Mira Jacobs on the show, Good Talk. That's a longer book, but that was also an interesting one. Grant, you published with the University of New Mexico Press with this one, and they worked with you to really make this into a beautiful physical object. And it's striking. Like it's unlike any book that I have ever seen, actually. So tell me about it. Like describe to readers or listeners rather what it looks like and what was that process of working with them and the vision that you all had for the package and how it should look.
Yeah, I was very lucky to work with University Press and University of New Mexico Press in particular, because they were really into treating the visual dimension of the book, seriously in a way that larger presses probably wouldn't have. And so the design, the paper, the relationship between the photographs and the text on the page, all of that mattered. And so I think they almost represented the story as a kind of prose poem with photos. They used white space. They formatted the text in interesting ways. And one reviewer described it as small enough to hold in one hand, yet vast enough to travel straight into your heart. And I love that description, because the whole project is about the conversation between what you can see and what you can only feel. And the book needed to honor that in its physical form too. So I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, it's a cool book to own just for that reason because it is so different. And there was something that you wrote about photography and death that I've circled back to a lot because it's genuinely haunting. And it's that idea, kind of photography as death in the sense that it says this was. So say more about that.
Yeah, that comes from Roland Barthes' writings on photography, his book Camera Lucida. But it goes to the heart of why photographs are, such powerful prompts for writers. A photograph doesn't restore the past, but what it does is attest to the fact that something existed. So it says, this was here, this person was alive, this moment happened. And the tension is that the photo shows the absence at the very moment as it preserves the present. So you look at an old photograph of someone you loved or love, and you feel, you can kind of feel two things simultaneously, their vividness and their goneness. And so a photograph is presence and death at the same time. And that's the emotional atmosphere of the book as well. So Dawn is dying. She's a photographer. The photographs she takes are little statements of this was, and she knows that. She realizes that.
Hmm. Yeah, and you love photography and you take great photos. So why did using Gail's photos work better than maybe it would have if they had been your own photographs?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I never even thought or didn't think too much about using my own photographs, partly because I've always admired Gail's work so much, but partly because using her photographs gave me the necessary distance to write to her photographs, because there was a sense of mystery there. And so when I look at my own photographs, I feel like I know too much. I know the context and the backstory and what happened before and after the frame. And that knowledge kind of crowds out the imagination. But Gail's photos gave me just enough, a surface, a mystery, and then everything else was open. So what's outside the frame entirely is the province of me, the writer. And so the story can go into the room behind the camera and into the days before or after the photo and into the interior life of whoever is standing there or not quite looking at the lens.
It's really interesting. It's a powerful prompt in and of itself, honestly. So, uh, I'll just say it again, like to write what's outside the frame. I'm curious if that's something that you've used in your own work or in working with students and other people you're working with in your writing.
Yeah, I love photo prompts for fiction and for memoir. And when I give photo prompts, um, I just like them because they're more open than a pointed text prompt. I don't ask people to describe what they see, but what they imagine. I ask, what does this photograph know that it isn't telling you, and what is outside the frame? And if this photograph says this was, what was lost in the moment that it was taken? Every photograph holds the smallest part of a much bigger story, which is one reason I love looking at photographs, especially of like my parents in the 70s or something. And and then the story tries to recover everything underneath.
That's interesting. So, Grant, we're going to do something unusual here because
Uh-oh.
we're running into a time situation. So, we are going to, uh, it's an interesting time to ask for this transition too, because I'm about to ask you something very personal, but we're going to do it after this break and probably in a different set of outfits in a different location. And for the listener, it will only feel like 1 second. So, we'll be right back. Well, everyone, we are back. It's a different time, different place. We sort of ran out of time last minute there, Grant. And so I am back. You're back. Great background, by the way.
I'm in my mom's apartment in her care center. So, not exactly my decor, but it's kind of nice to be in a new decor today.
Yeah,
New place,
always
new
nice.
recording.
Well, and
Yeah.
if you recall, I was about to ask you something more personal. So
Huh?
perhaps it's perfect that you're sitting there in a senior's home in front of your mother's mirror.
My mom
And
keeps telling me to put myself on the wait list for being here. So
oh,
yeah,
there you
I might
go.
I might be here soon.
Long term planning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you because you've described your 30s as the least successful and least glorious years of your life, partly because of severe carpal tunnel that made your writing almost impossible to do. And then you turned to photography during that time. So that's what I wanted to ask you about. What did that period of time teach you? It's kind of a rough thing to say least successful, least glorious, but turned out okay.
Yeah, those are my words. I had expected a lot for my 30s, like when I was 20, I was like, the 30s is when it all happens. But unfortunately not. That's the great irony of life is you can't plan it. And so it was a kind of enforced surrender, which actually turned out to be very instructive, as these things generally are. And so I couldn't do the thing I most wanted to do. So I had to find another way to be in the world as an artist. And I searched for several things and then found photography. And I think the reason I embraced it was so much like being a writer, because photography taught me to be like a witness and to be patient and to, trust what catches my attention without, explaining to myself so much. And I think of Baudelaire, who had this idea of the flaneur, the spectator who wanders the city and becomes kind of a botanist of the sidewalk. I think that's the word he used. And so photography did that for me. It was like an excuse to kind of walk around and observe and witness. And that's one reason I love road trips. Actually, they help me notice and collect what I notice with photos. And in fact, I take most of my road trips alone just for that sake, because I'll do wild turnarounds in my car to capture something I see. And I think it would drive anybody else mad. But I think that's the sensibility underneath this book. It's a wanderer's book and it's episodic and it's hopefully alive to accident and open to what turns up. And that's my best way of living.
Yeah. Well, I do think you achieved that with the book, which is great and different. And you also draw on the photographer Henry Cartier-Bresson and his concept of the decisive moment, which is that fraction of a second when the significance of an event crystallizes. I love that specificity. Is that a target for flash fiction also, or even flash memoir, as the case might be?
Yeah, exactly. I was kind of thinking that as you were asking the question, like when you said that, memoir relied on the catalyst moment, and I think there's a kinship there. And except that the decisive moment isn't a long moment, it's the instant of sort of maximum meaning when everything suddenly and briefly but perfectly itself. And I think flash fiction is chasing that same thing in language. You're not trying to narrate a story from beginning and end. You're just trying to catch the moment when the whole story is suddenly visible and dramatic, even if it's interior.
Hmm. It's such a good practice for any writer to just to get those little moments. And of course, I want to ask you about how the book got published. We know that you famously work with indies. I think it's an important story for our listeners to hear, especially these indie success stories. And when people are thinking about their own publishing paths, your agent told you the big five wouldn't be interested. Having seen the book, I agree. It's experimental, it's different. So
Yeah.
talk about that.
A tough sell. I always
Yeah.
hope that the big five will open up their arms to me, but I don't think they will. And my agent was absolutely right, and I trusted that opinion from the beginning. I didn't want to send it to the big five in any manner. But honestly, that turned out to be really fortunate, and it led to exactly the right outcome. I think a big five publisher would have wanted to normalize the book, fewer photographs, more linear narrative, easier to shelve, or they just wouldn't have wanted it at all, which I think probably would have been the case. And I think what would have been lost is exactly what makes it what it is. I thought the strength of the book for me as a consumer, as a reader, is that it's different and that it's eye catching. And the University of New Mexico Press, they'd already published my earlier book, The Art of Brevity. So I had an existing relationship and a trust with them. And when I brought them this book, they immediately saw that its strangeness was its value. And, they didn't want to sand down the edges. They wanted to amplify, what was unusual about it. And I think they captured that they did invested in the cover and the formatting in a really beautiful way. And I think I always say this, indie presses are publishing the most interesting, adventurous, formally unusual work right now. They're not beholden to bestseller lists in the same way. They can say yes to a book just because it's extraordinary or special, or, even if it's difficult to categorize. And then, as I mentioned, the care that they took with the physical object, the design, the paper, the production really mattered a lot to me. And so I'm glad they delivered. So I just always encourage people to really seek out indie presses, because sometimes they're not readily available in the book review or the most anticipated lists or even in your bookstore.
Right. And they are publishing the most interesting stuff. I do want to just pause on that little phrase you said, formally unusual. It's so great
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
it's so true. It's like formally within, or as I should say, unusual with intention.
Yeah.
Um, so let me go to the opening passage of the book to end here, Grant. You've described this as the seed of everything. And you write, I think we all possess something inside us like electricity, a pulse, an energy. You feel it, but you can't see it. It's there even when it's not. I suppose that's a soul. And then you say something like a scent in the air, something out there in the distance. There's the title of the book. That's the way I think of dawn now, out there in the distance. So tell us, what is dawn to you?
Yeah. She's definitely the person you love who is leaving. I think we've all experienced that in a variety of ways. And she's grief before it becomes grief, that period when somebody is still there but already leaving at the same kind of in the same breath. And I think most have had someone in our lives who we've held in that way, and someone who's become, as I say, out there in the distance. And so the whole book is a way of trying to close that distance, yet knowing you can't and trying anyway. It's kind of
Mm.
I guess, a dramatic way to live in a way.
Yeah. Well, and for the memoir writers, of course, who listen to us and are following the, impulses and energies of their own stories, what does Dawn's story have to say to them?
Yeah, I think fiction and memoir are closer than we think. I like thinking of the two a lot, and storytelling in general and how that binds them. And so I think of the longing in Dawn and how it's really real, or I wanted to make it feel real, even though she's invented and the road they're driving on is real, the desire to keep moving and to keep looking and to find something out there in the distance that might turn out to be a home. And memoirs writers are doing the same when they write. I think they're writing to the questions. They're trying to recover the unimaginable gap between breathing and dreaming that is grief, as one of my blurbers, Vanita Blackburn, put it. I really like that phrase. And so they're, like photography, they're trying to say this was, and to mean something larger than the words.
I love that so much. There's so much to think about with this was, pertinent to photography, pertinent to our stories and what we're trying to capture. So thank you. The book, everybody, is Something Out There in the Distance, published by University of New Mexico Press. I hope everybody will read it. Thank you, listeners. And now we have a special treat, which is that Gail, who is Grant's photographer, is coming on the show, and Grant and Gail are going to talk shop about how they put this book together. Super interesting. So Gail will be back on after this short break, and Grant will be back not in this location, folks. He is a moving target. So we will be back after this short break.
Welcome back, listeners. This is part 2 of our special Something Out There in the Distance show with my collaborator on the book, Gail Butensky, the photographer and longtime friend. And instead of reading Gail's bio, because I generally don't like reading bios to start with, and I think we can get more flavor of who Gail is, instead of reading her bio, I'm going to ask her 4 questions that's going to sum up Gail's entire essence and existence, right?
Right.
So here goes. We're going to start with a crucial question. What is your favorite baseball team and why?
The Mets, because it's in my DNA.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, no, it is. I mean, I have pictures of me as like a little tiny kid going to a Mets game at Shea. So for all the different places I've been, Cubs, and before there were lights, and the Giants, and now the Dodgers, or the Brooks, if you want to still call them that. If they're playing the Mets, that's who I would root for.
Yeah, that is so great. I love that it's in your DNA. Well, here's the second question. This is getting more into your photography. When did you first start taking photos, and what drew you to photos?
Okay, I've always taken photos as far as I can remember, but not really in a serious manner. The first time I was in a dark room was my last semester at college. And then I was like, oh, maybe this is it. Because I was graduating and I didn't know what I was doing. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is cool. So that got me way more into it. I mean, I've always been kind of drawn to pictures. I don't know. I think it's kind of a nostalgia thing, or a way to remember, instead of journaling, it's like you're keeping the past with you and that kind of thing. And it's just a way of observing and watching.
I was going to say, it seems like photography is in your DNA too. These are all DNA questions, I think. Because you've always been, I mean, I can't even remember when I first met you, especially you without a camera.
Yeah. No,
and that was pre-digital too.
Yep. Yeah. I used to wait tables with cameras around my neck.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did that in New York.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the next question, is how many tables do you think you've waited in your waiting career?
Okay. I had 2 answers to this. One is just so many I can't even enumerate. Then I had a snarkier answer, which was just one, over and over and over again. Because that's what it feels like sometimes, right? I waited tables for a really long time, a lot of different places. Yeah. Oh, who knows how many? It was years.
I think I can only remember my bad tables, and this is so listeners know.
Right.
Is it Gail and I met? This is part of the origin story of the book. We met at a restaurant called Radio Valencia in the early 90s in the Mission District of San Francisco, and we had at least 1 or 2 shifts a week together. And I think I was there maybe 3 years, and Gail was there longer,
way longer.
Mm-hmm. And somehow we found. I always used to. Every time I left a restaurant somewhere there in my 20s, I was like, I've waited my last table. And then that was never true,
Right,
so
right.
I will not even say it now. I'm like, there's some table out there waiting for me. Maybe when I'm in the care center, I'll be waiting tables there.
There you go. Something to fall back on.
Yeah, exactly. I always think of it as a fallback, but I don't think I can physically do it. I think I'm too
I
old
know.
now.
Oh, it's exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I've known this and maybe forgotten it. Why did you move to San Francisco?
Oh, there's a lot of different reasons there. I think it all comes down to weather. I kept moving places that were warmer. Like I went from Chicago back to New York, then to San Francisco, and now Los Angeles because I decided I really didn't like winter. More specifically, at the time, it was the late 80s in New York. And it was, looking back, I love the gritty and the grimy part of the city, which is gone now. I kind of miss it, right? If you go to New York now, it's like Disneyland, apparently. I don't know. I haven't been in a while, but um, it was a bit much. And I lived across the street from the on-ramp to the BQE Expressway, and they were handcuffing the crack dealers to the fence in the park around the corner. And
Wow.
I'd get on the subway to go to work. And it was just like and the Williamsburg Bridge, they finally reopened it after it had been closed because it was falling down. So everything was kind of a mess and falling down. And I felt like I wasn't really going anywhere either. So that's usually what I do is I move to another town.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
now you're in LA.
Yeah. For a long time, for longer than I've been anywhere. 20, almost 24 years.
No, that's so
I
strange
don't know
because
how that happened.
I always think of you as a San Franciscan, but
Right. And part of me still thinks of me as a New Yorker, which has been like 30, 40. I haven't been to New York in so many years. So it's so bizarre. Yeah.
well, you still seem like fundamentally a New Yorker. Maybe that never goes away.
See, in my DNA.
Yeah, it's in your DNA. But that leads into your photos. You're setting me up with all these great segues because I mean, I loved your work when I first encountered it when we first started waiting tables. I loved all the random photos, but I also loved your photos of punk rock bands and stuff. And then I think it was like somewhere in there. I don't know if it was when you met Greg, your now husband, but you started taking a lot of road trips in the Southwest and started taking a
Hmm.
lot of photos in the Southwest, and those might have even captivated me more than your other photos. So it's interesting to me because you took those photos just to take photos. It was the photo itself. You weren't thinking of it as part of a book, and so it just occurred to me that it could have been strange suddenly having these stories attached to your photos because we didn't plan those stories out. And so I'm curious, did the fiction I wrote change the photographs in any way?
I don't know. I don't think they changed them. They put a different perspective maybe on there. So you can read those kind of pictures. I mean, a lot of those pictures a lot of ways because they're not, there's no people, they're more scenic. But I will say when I took them, it was for a book because every time I took a trip I made a book. So I would make a little handmade little book of the pictures. I mean, that wasn't the purpose of the pictures, but that's what it would turn into. So I have all these little notebooks that I made back then. So that wasn't the goal. Was just, again, it was just the way I took pictures. It was like, here I am, let's take a picture of it. Or, oh, that looks good. Or, then there's a lot of stuff that was just, and then also part of the other reason I did a lot more of the desert stuff was I started printing in color.
Mm.
So I had done a lot of black and white, like all the New York stuff was black and white. I mean, I had done color all along, but just so much less of it. And black and white I could print so easily. And I did a lot of road trip stuff in black and white to start, but then when it started getting more Southwest, more deserty, I don't know, something like the California sun or something, the light, out here is so crazy. And I was working at a color lab. So I had access to print color and I learned how to do that. And I would just do that all the time. So I think that
Huh.
actually just that technical little bit of it added to it.
That's fascinating. Where your access to
Exactly.
printing in
Huge,
color
huge part of
like
it. Yeah.
kind of coincided with when the road trip started. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I remember because we've just so listeners know, we've done some book events and done some interviews and stuff like that. And one thing that I always picked up was like, people, it seemed interviewers always really want to know your overall like artistic strategy or something. And so they'd ask these questions of you like that. And you'd be like, no, I just saw it and it was fun, like,
Uh-huh.
so, and it just, and I feel like that as I get older as a writer. I feel like every time I get asked a question, I'm just like, oh, it's my intuition, just like
Mm-hmm.
one word, except that intuition is really about um, a practice over a long period of time and how you develop intuition for what's good, either words on the page or photography. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your intuition as a photographer.
I think it's just a matter of doing it more and more and more, right? So the more you like, even, I mean, on a road trip, there's certain things you might be looking for or seeing or that sort of thing. But when you're just taking a walk around town, you're if you do that with the intent of, is there a picture out there? You just start seeing it that way. So I don't even know if it's intuition as much as like training, although I guess that's part of intuition, right? That kind of goes together. Like you're trained to see, look a certain way, and you're trained sort of in a slightly way to have that sort of intuition.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like stories too. I always say that everybody's a storyteller, but a lot of people don't think they're storytellers because they haven't trained their mind to recognize the stories in their lives. And so I think it's the same way with taking photos. Although, like what's interesting about taking photos to me though is like when I lived in the Haight in San Francisco, that's when I first started taking photos. And I would take my dog out every morning and I would always find really interesting things to photograph. And that my neighborhood in Berkeley doesn't serve that purpose to me somehow. I rarely photograph things here. And
But
so
is
I'm
it because
curious.
you've just looked at it all for a long time because you've been there a while now, right? Or is it more? I feel like there's always something, and they have these like beginner photo assignments where you're like, you're in this room, like, let's see you
Yeah.
shoot a roll of film in this room, that kind of thing. So I think it's just a matter of, you can abstract something or find something. There's always something.
There's always something, and I have taken photographs of my neighborhood, but I think like the Haight was like when you were talking about a grittiness, like there is a gritty urban life that
Sure,
fascinates me
sure.
more than like the blooming trees in my neighborhood. I'll
Well, sure.
occasionally
So,
take.
so,
Yeah,
so you're just looking for something else then.
yeah. It's
I mean,
just
there's
my
there's there is something to take in Berkeley, but it's just not the same thing that's not your style or what you're looking for, maybe. Yeah.
exactly. So, do you think you found your style in those southwestern road trips?
Oh, no. I think my style is still um not even necessarily bands, but more just like people, just groups of people and just off the cuff kind of stuff more. Honestly, the southwestern stuff, I mean, the stuff I take out the car window maybe, but if we're
Uh huh.
like, some of the pictures I've taken are very scenic, but I'm still using like a little 35 millimeter, maybe a 2.25 camera. But the classic pictures like that you see are people with field cameras and 8x10 and to make it all perfect. And I just never did it that way. That's partly where the Where's Greg bunch comes from, because I wanted to take these scenic pictures, but I had to do it. Maybe that's kind of like my way of doing it.
And just so listeners
Mm.
know, the Where's Greg series, which I like, is you tell the story, Gail. What's the
Well,
Where's
okay.
Greg series?
Well, it started when we would go driving around and camping, and we would pull into wherever we were going to be, which was sometimes just in the middle of, it wasn't a campground, it was just somewhere down some dirt road. And I'd be unloading, and I'm like, where's Greg? Oh, he's over there. He's climbing that hill over there. So I would take a picture getting the scenery in, and then he would be so far away. And now at the point I'm like, go over there, I got to take a picture, you're far away, stay far away so I can get my picture. So it's him as a tiny little speck in some big scenery.
Well, this is wonderful. I talked a lot about your photos in the book, and when I was talking to Brooke earlier, and I feel like one thing I love about it's funny you mentioned taking photos out the window of the car while you're moving, because I think your photos always have a sort of spontaneous feel and this kind of raw energy, and they always feel, even when you're taking photos without people involved, there's action there, there's tension and a drama. And I don't even know if that's part of your training or intuition.
No,
um
I think that's just my energy. I think that's just me.
yeah,
Apparently I can't sit still. So I just kind of, you know, and it started when I started seriously taking pictures, like in the 80s. I was like running all over the place. I was going out every night and I was seeing all this loud music and jumping, people were jumping around. So that's kind of stuck with me. even if I don't do that anymore, but the visual style is sort of kept up a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you for talking about your photographs in the book. And I'm just going to tell our listeners that we're trying to open up access to photography. You too can go out there and just think about how to frame it and what the light is and take great photos and write your stories, write your life stories to them. So thanks again, Gail.
Great. Thank you.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm coming at you again from the Deerfield Community Care Center in Des Moines, Iowa, from my mom's apartment. And I want to share a positive book trend today. And it's a trend that actually surprised me. Independent Bookstore Day happened April 25th. And I want to talk about why it should be every day, not as a slogan, but as a genuine practice, because one Saturday a year where people flood their indie local bookstores and buy a tote bag and get a stamp on a bookstore crawl, that's super wonderful. But it's also a little like deciding to eat vegetables once a year and calling it a healthy lifestyle.
Isn't that true? What a good metaphor. We talked about this. Well, we've talked about it a lot, actually, about Amazon and the way that it systematically undercuts indie bookstores. It's been doing so actually for 30 years, not just competing with them, but selling books at below cost or at a loss leader, especially because of their Prime membership, which I have to say is very hard to get out of, everybody. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I canceled my Prime. My kid signed up for it and I couldn't believe it because he even had the authority to activate my Prime membership shows you also something about what's wrong with online and these businesses. So really hard to get out of, hard to stay out of, especially if you have children. But indie bookstores, they can't compete with prices that are structurally designed to be competitive. And so I just want to echo what you're saying. I mean, we really need to be trying to shop at our indie bookstores. I really am trying with more effort than ever before lately. And Amazon reshaped the entire publishing supply chain. They did that by, I mean, you could call it negotiating wholesale terms, but the reality is that they force them upon publishers. We don't get to negotiate. Amazon says, here's what your terms are. Indie bookstores have no capacity to match those terms, and so really what they've been doing is building a closed ecosystem. They control self-publishing because of KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing. I think they price fix, by keeping ebooks at $9.99 or lower. And so it just is this thing that they're designing a whole playing field that is not just uneven. It's like they're playing on their own field and everyone else is over here, and it's really not cool.
Yeah, definitely not. And so I'm looking for some hope in all that. It's pretty gloomy at times.
Sorry, I know.
Brooke, you're in charge of gloom, and I'm
I am in charge of gloom. Thank you.
Sunshine. Yeah, from now on. Yeah, well, this is what surprised me. Between 2020 and 2025, the number of independent bookstores in the U.S. actually jumped by 70%. I did not imagine that at all. And in 2025 alone, 422 independently owned shops open nationwide, which was open 31% from the year before. And I know running a bookstore, there's super tight margins. So that's why it really surprises me. And so my question is what's driving it? Because it's not that Amazon got less powerful. And I read that independent bookstores, this is the great thing about them, they've leaned into the one thing that Amazon genuinely cannot replicate, and that's the ability to convene people. And some stores now host up to 500 events a year, I read, which is, man, that's a lot. And that's why I've been surprised, because I've actually encountered some bookstores on my book tour who were reluctant to host events, or actually one that charged authors. And I just think events and community building are indie bookstores' strength, and they should lean into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the bookstores that I'm familiar with are doing that level of events, and sometimes a lot of hybrid events, online events, in-person events. Indies are definitely tapped into the author community in ways that introduce readers to books and genres. And of course, that creates loyalty and brings people coming back. Amazon can tell you what people like you have bought, or what product you're buying and others have bought, stuff like that. That could be okay, but that's not the same. When I go into an indie bookstore, I like touching the books, perusing, seeing what I want to buy, so there's so many good reasons to go in. And if you, of course, the downside is a lot of people don't have a bookstore in their community, which is all the more reason to, cultivate a relationship with an indie bookstore that you really care about, and then you can buy their books online.
Yeah, good advice. And then there is an actual economic argument to this. It's not just sentiment and nostalgia. Money spent at an independent bookstore recirculates in the local economy at roughly 3 times the rate of money spent online, I read. And I just want to mention the author, Ann Padgett, and she owns Parnassus Books in Nashville. And she said in a 2026 TED Talk, if you're interested in living in a society where people read, it's also your responsibility to cultivate readers. Reading shines the light that disrupts the dark isolation so many people find themselves in. Go to your local bookstore and see what I'm talking about, which I totally agree about. Just what you said, Brooke. I mean, I've found so many authors just by picking up their book and just feeling that texture of their book and that kind of mysterious calling that is in those books. So, go out there, folks, and shop indie.
Yeah, as much as we can. And, right now, more than 2,000 indie bookstores across the US are out there waiting for you. I do think that's an amazing and hopeful figure, 2,000 stores. And as you said, Grant, they do not need one Saturday a year. They need a Tuesday. They need a random Wednesday. They need your weekend, so try to make it happen. And as I said, you certainly can support indies online. It's not the case that there's no other shopping options besides Amazon. It's a choice to use Amazon. We do have to work with our children on it. We'll say as soon as James did that, I was like, you do know that I am protesting Amazon, right? And we had to have a good conversation about it. So, it's also a learning opportunity for our kids.
My kids still sign up for various streaming services without permission. So expect more coming your way. It gets dizzying. But unlike Amazon, guess what? Memoir Nation, we are interested in developing community online, in person, locally, all of it. So we want to provide you all the support and inspiration you need to write your story. So please sign up for Memoir Nation, the org at memoirnation.com, and join our community. We believe that stories change the world, and that includes your story. So don't put it off. Write it now.